Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigus.
Welcome back, everyone, to the very latest Fly Culture podcast. I hope you are all well. I hope you've been out catching a few fish too. Thank you to everyone who has bought the latest edition of the magazine. It's a really thrilling time at the moment because people are getting the opportunity to read the magazine, and it's really cool to get feedback from people and how much they're enjoying it. And it's, as you know, if you've written to me, I always make sure I reply to you as well. But it's been really thrilling to see that, and I'm really pleased that this summer edition of the magazine you're enjoying equally as much as well. So thank you, and of course, thank you to all the contributors as well. The podcast as well. Thank you again for the nice messages about that and suggestions of who we might interview. So I do listen to all of those, so I'm gradually lining those up. I'm really thrilled to be joined today by Dani Morey, and she is a salmon angler based on the Spey. She's been salmon fishing for about 25 years, and she's been a full-time guide for 3 years. So I'm really looking forward to learning a little bit about the fishing that she does, hopefully get some fishing tips as well. We've been talking off mic, and hugely passionate angler as well. So we thought we better start, as we'd been talking for about half an hour beforehand. So Dani, it's great to have you along. Thank you so much for joining me. How's it going?
Very well, thank you for inviting me. It's always great to be talking fishing.
It sounds like it as well, and it seems as though you're an incredibly passionate angler. Where did that all start for you?
I'm very lucky. It started basically as soon as I could stand. My father had me out in front of the house with a trout rod, wielding it around, and then as I grew bigger, the rods grew bigger, and fortunately the fish grew bigger as well. So basically fishing as soon as I could stand. First came up to the Spey about 30 plus years ago, and turned to my father the first day and said, I'm going to live here one day. And I did eventually. I actually ended up resigning from a job because my boss wouldn't give me time off to come fishing, and I moved up here for good and never looked back.
And how long ago was that you moved up here? Or up there, sorry.
I moved up here permanently about 20 years ago. I worked in London for a while, and
So I was going to say, it must have been fantastic, the switch between London, the pace and the pace of life you have up there, and having fishing on your doorstep as well must have been amazing.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people thought I was crazy leaving a very good lifestyle and a very good wage. But I think you reach a point in life where you realise that there are more important things than that. And actually the quality of life is far more important. I walk onto the river every day when I'm guiding, and I look around me, and I might be paid a pittance. But to be honest, I have the best office in the world, and the scenery, the people that I meet, just the places that fishing takes you, it makes me the richest girl in the world. And I think really I'm incredibly lucky to be able to do what I do full time.
Do you think, given the background that we've had recently of obviously the pandemic, do you think there'll be more of people doing similar sort of things?
Absolutely. I think it's shown a lot of people that they can enjoy a simpler way of life. I think my big concern with lockdown, I have young children, and seeing the effect on them, and also the effect it's had on me, to be honest, with regards to mental health and confidence. You know, we haven't been interacting with other humans. It really does affect your mindset, and nature is such a great healer. And if you get people out enjoying nature and looking around them, you forget about what else is going on in the world. You forget about your cares. And I think it's a really great place to be. And when somebody masters spey casting or hooks into a fish, it boosts their confidence, absolutely no end. And so I think there will be a future for fishing with regards to the therapy aspect of it and what it does for people's mental health, which is at the moment a huge issue.
Even I find just the sound of the water is deeply soothing and comforting at times. And I hear what you say about that, because it does, even the noise is enough for me
Absolutely.
sometimes.
And the wind in the trees and the smell of the grass on the bank. And I've been very fortunate to be standing in a river guiding somebody and turned around and I've seen a stag swimming across the river behind me, which is incredible. Not many people can say that they've seen a Highland stag swim across a river. The birds that you see, I mean, the squirrels, the flowers, everything. It's something that affects all of your senses, absolutely. And as you say, just the sound of the water and the slow motion of it, it makes you slow down and appreciate life at a much better pace, I think, really.
Yeah, yeah. We were talking, we're going to take you back to those early stages of fishing, but I know we were talking off mic and you've just mentioned that you live right on the Spey there. I've passed over it. I've never been lucky enough to fish it on my way to the Devon, which I loved fishing immensely. But how would you, to somebody who's not seen or fished the Spey, how would you describe it? What does it mean to you?
Oh gosh, the Spey. I think for a lot of people, it's the dream come true. I have a lot of American clients, and they've heard of Spey casting, and to come to the home of Spey casting to cast a fly on such hallowed water is definitely on the bucket list for a lot of people. I've been very fortunate to fish around the world for different species of fish, but there's something about the Spey that just gets under my skin. It's just where I want to be. It's somewhere I'm hugely passionate about, and there's nothing more that I enjoy than sharing that with other people. And I think everybody should have the opportunity, if they want to, if they're keen on fishing, to come and fish the Spey. It's somewhere that you'll never ever forget.
And it's one of those ones you were saying, again, we were talking off mic, that isn't as expensive as people always assume it is. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right. I've got the wrong accent to say this, but salmon fishing is perceived as being a toff sport, a sport for toffs. It's not. It shouldn't be. Salmon fishing, you don't need to have expensive kit to catch a fish. Equally, you don't have to have millions in the bank to come and fish the Spey. There's some very affordable fishing. I think at the moment there's an awful lot of fishing that's coming available only to locals, but that's about to change. And I think that anybody who wants to fish it should come and fish it. Don't be put off. Don't fall for the old whim that it is only for people with lots of money. It's not. It's there. It's accessible to everybody. We've got brilliant association waters. You can get day tickets. And also look on the various websites, contact the estates. Fishing early season in particular, you can get some real bargains for the fishing. And for me, actually, it offers some of the best fishing. If you hook into a fresh Spey springer, boy, do you know about it. It's the biggest excitement of any fishing I think I've ever had.
That sounds an amazing river to fish at. And it's interesting you talk about the Spey, obviously, in Spey casting, and I'm a super keen Spey caster as well. And is the Spey casting, I believe, came about there because of the high banks? Is that the case, that they couldn't make overhead casts, and so Spey casting
That's
was sort of
right.
a way of getting round the high banks?
The high banks and a lot of trees as well. It's quite heavily treed. So yes, you couldn't really overhead cast. You'd be hooking back behind you on every cast. So it was a technique that was adapted very much specific to the river, but as we see, it's used on a lot of other rivers these days as well. It's not as complicated as a lot of people think. You just need to practice. It's like anything in life, isn't it? You need to practice a little. It comes down to three things. I always say it's timing, technique, and the tempo that you move at. And once you master that, easy peasy.
We shall come on to that very quickly, very quickly. But first, I want to go back to where things started. And you said your father had you fishing at a very, very young age. Where was it you were fishing at the time? And I guess, was it trout first, and then it sort of developed from there?
It was trout, grayling. My father also had, I was very lucky, he had some trout lakes. So as kids, we used to go down there and just dabble about and throw a few flies into the water and occasionally hook something, which was great fun. And then we progressed on to the chalk streams of Hampshire. All very spoiling, but at the time we just took it for granted. It wasn't dead man's shoes to us. It was just part of our playground. And then somebody dropped out of one of my father's boys' trips up to the Spey, and at the last minute he decided he'd take me with him, and that was it. That was me into the Spey and just never looking back, never wanting to fish another river or go and see other rivers, but always come home to the Spey.
Do you remember, I assume that first salmon came on the Spey, do you remember it?
My first salmon, actually, there's a bit of a tale behind this one. My first salmon came from the Hampshire Avon, and it was a salmon that three of us can lay claim to. I was fishing with my father and my elder sister, and my father said, right, I'll put you in this spot here. And my sister said, no, I want to fish here, you move on. And my father said, right, I'll show you how to cast. And I said, no, I want to do it, I want to do it. And so he and I held the rod with my sister holding on to him because she didn't want to move from the spot she wanted to fish there. And my father and I jointly cast out and hooked into a 20+ salmon. So I was incredibly spoilt from the word go. And I have to say, I think that was probably my biggest fish yet. Was also my first. My first Spey one was a springer. Didn't quite break the 20 mark. It was a big fish. It was a lovely deep fish and certainly incredibly memorable.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. And was it from that moment that you knew this was it? Because as somebody who has a daughter, and my daughter's grown up around fishing as well, but it was something I tried to never impose on her because it's easy to do that. And I think people would rebel against it if it was forced too much, particularly if they're not really biting at it. And she sort of comes back to fishing every now and again and then sort of doesn't touch it again. Do you think that fish helped that set the tone for your fishing career and in fact how your life has turned out as well?
Absolutely, I do. I'm the same as you, actually. With my children, I tried not to encourage them too much into the fishing, partly because it was my little world. It was my escapism from being mummy. I could go off and be Dani again. But they absolutely love it. So now I have to try and sneak out of the house, or I leave all my fishing kit in the back of the car so they don't see when I'm going fishing. I just disappear. But yes, I think your formative years do pave the way for the future. And I think it might not be perceived as terribly cool for youngsters to go fishing once they hit the teens. But if the groundwork's there, I think, or I hope that it's something that they'll always come back to and that they'll always enjoy.
And was there a stage where you felt, as we said, you've been guiding and helping people with fishing for quite some time now. Was there a tipping point where you realized this was for you? Were you sort of doing it to help people along and then discovered that this was perhaps the route you wanted to go down and you got a great deal of pleasure from teaching people and passing on your passion for something? Was there a point where you realized this was for you and that was where you wanted to go?
It was what I always wanted to do. I used to drive for an hour and a half to get to the office every day, and this is once I'd moved to Scotland. But every evening I'd drive an hour and a half back, and I would head straight down to the river, and I would fish until dark. And some mornings, if I knew it was going to be a hot day, I'd get up early and I'd go fishing, and then drive into work. Somebody once said, "Fishing isn't a matter of life or death; it's more important than that." And I've certainly always agreed with that. For me, it was something always in my life. It was something I always wanted to do, but couldn't quite figure out how to make it work. But it was when I had my first child that I suddenly thought, I don't want to go back to 9 to 5 and squeezing in fishing. Actually, it's too much of a passion for me, and it was like an itch that I had to scratch, that I knew I had to do more permanently. And 5 days before I had my son, I was standing heavily pregnant, looking like a galleon in my waders, fishing. And 2 days after I had him, I stuck him in a papoose down the front of my waders and carried on fishing. And that really reinforced to me that it was possible to get that work-life balance of being mummy and working. And as the children grow up, I'm very fortunate that, as you said, in the last sort of 3 years, 3 or 4 years, I've been able to make it a full-time job, much more permanent. And I look forward to getting back there as soon as I possibly can.
And so how did that feel when you got that first pay packet from taking someone guiding? How did that feel?
To be honest, it wasn't about the pay packet. It was just about seeing the look of enjoyment on their face, seeing them sharing with somebody my big passion, what I love most in life, seeing them getting the same enjoyment from it, seeing them mastering the casting, seeing them hooking into a fish. We said earlier that, well, I said that I reached a point where, or I was told I would reach a point in life where I'd have hooked enough fish for myself and I'd get far more enjoyment from watching other people. And I thought, what a load of nonsense. No, that's not going to happen. I'm just going to keep going, keep going. I'm hooked. I've got to catch more and more fish. But you do actually, you reach an age or a point where you think, actually, I want to share this with other people. And it definitely, that first day out when I did it, and I was actually being paid for it rather than just introducing friends or doing it out of the goodness of my heart. Yeah, it was pretty special. It definitely, I've made the right decision. I could go and earn a lot more money, be a slave to the wage. Would my life be rich in other ways? No. So I wouldn't change it for the world. Absolutely. I'm the richest, luckiest girl in the world when I pull on my waders and walk into that river each day.
That's really cool. And I think what I was getting at with the wage thing was that I remember when I worked for Nick and my first ever day, and I remember getting paid, and I thought, wow, I'm a fishing guide. And it was, I'd actually always wanted to put on my passport, I was a fishing guide, and I did it. And I did have it on there, which was really, really cool and really enjoyed it. And that was the sort of moment I thought, wow, I'm in this, I'm loving it. And like you, it is about passing a passion on to somebody and a love for something and not actually holding the rod yourself and living vicariously through your client or your guest for the day. And that moment when they actually hook that fish is pretty cool. And I just still, after 16 years and my last day, I was still getting as excited about people hooking fish as they ever did. And those moments are really, really special, aren't they?
They really are. And also, no 2 days are the same because the clients, the guests are always different. You can walk onto the same pool on the same beat on the same river day after day, and it's never the same pool, and it's never the same day in the office. And I think that makes it really special. But I was just chuckling actually when you said putting down fishing guide as your occupation. Doesn't it drive you mad if I'm filling out insurance forms or anything like that and it says occupation and it's never there? And I have to tick between, do I go for teacher, which covers the instructing side, or do I go for fisherman, or sometimes if you're lucky, you get trawlerman? None of them, I've never been one to fit inside a box. And I think that just proves it, really, doesn't it? We're very special people. We are a unique breed of people. But we need that extra little tick box put on the forms, please, so we can fill out properly and we can be really proud of what we do on a daily basis.
Absolutely. I remember now you say that actually, because I zoom around in a truck and the moment you put fisherman, they assumed you worked on a trawler. And as a result of that, you were therefore high risk. And then, so as a result of that, you'd have to pay a huge, great premium because these are all the silly little things being a fishing guide that people don't see that when you have that insurance come through for your car, even for ferrying people around, that is quite expensive as well, isn't it? You have to factor all of those things in as well, don't you?
You do, and the public liability insurance as well, because terrible though it is, statistically, at least one person a year drowns on the Spey. And I always say to people, I will not take anybody out who's not wearing glasses, protective glasses, or a life vest, because I said, I don't want you becoming a statistic. You're not going to become one on my watch. So it's something I really, really enforce. I'm very strict about is I don't care if you think it's uncool. You forget about fashion, you forget about how you look. It's not about glamour. It's not about posing on the riverbank to make your Instagram look better and better. It's about being safe and about having fun as well. It's the only thing I'm really strict about is the safety aspect. Because as I say, not on my watch, thanks.
That's a good point. Very good point. And like you say, it's a big grown-up river, isn't it? And yeah, you could, I guess, could easily come a cropper on there. Let's take it somewhere else now, because we've chatted about it and we've alluded to it, spey casting. And when did you start spey casting?
Oh, that would be my first trip up to the Spey, actually. So about 30 years ago, with my father and all of his mucky mates, as he called them, when they plonked me in a pair of those wonderful old-fashioned ocean waders. So it was like wearing a plastic bag, and they were men's ones, so they were several sizes too big, and they literally plonked me into what I believe is the fastest flowing river in the UK, gave me this enormous rod, which was about twice the size of anything I'd ever encountered, and said, right, there you go, this is how you spey cast, lift it up, twirl it round a bit, and flick it out again. And needless to say, I think the only thing I caught was myself, or my waders, my hat, several rocks, trees, banks, everything. And I thought, yes, this is fine, but actually I'm not going to get anywhere here. So I watched what all the chaps were doing, went and had a word with the gilly. But back then, there weren't many young girls fishing. So it was pretty overwhelming for me to have to ask for help. And I think the gilly himself was a bit shocked that this wee lassie suddenly wanted to learn to do what everybody else was doing. But he very kindly gave me some pointers. And I think that proved to me how important it is that when you're starting out, you do actually have somebody there who knows what they're doing. It's like driving. You don't want to pick up bad habits that you can't iron out later. So find a professional, get somebody there who knows what they're doing, who can help you. And it gives you far more enjoyment if you can do something properly. You're not going to get stressed about it. It'll work out a lot better.
And so tell me, what is your favourite spey cast?
I love casting off my right shoulder because I'm right-handed. And for me, that's the best. What I hate most is windy days and double spey. And we seem to get a lot more windy days up here. I never get too tired on the technical side of all the kit that we're using and different lines for different conditions. You know, everybody says, well, you need this for a windy day and you need that for that day. And I think when people are starting out, don't get bogged down too much with that. Just teach them the basics, teach them basic roll cast, teach them a basic single spey, double spey, and that should be enough to get them going. What about you? What's your favourite style?
Oh, it's got to be the single spey. It's got to be.
Yeah,
It's just the most beautiful cast. Technically, it's not the
it's
easiest,
very
as you will
graceful.
well know. But yeah, it's just the most beautiful cast I think there is, and that's where I was probing with that one, just to see, because I just think it is phenomenal. Interestingly, I've torn somehow one rotator cuff in my right arm, and then my left one as well
Ouch.
has gone in a freak accident. Yeah, I've never known pain like it, I have to say. And my left one's still a little sore. And it was interesting. I was practicing my spey casting when we were in lockdown, and I noticed how my grip had narrowed because I couldn't widen my shoulders. And there were some photos I happened to put out somewhere, and I suddenly thought, wow, I can see where I'm gripping the rod. And then I've been really trying to, I can't, it still gets a little bit sore. So I've been circle spaying and snap teeing and stuff like that. It's puts less on my shoulder to do it. But when I feel nice, in good shape, then I'll go back to the single spay again. But it's been really interesting to see that. One of the things I've been playing with is thinking about the grip, but also how softly I'm holding the rod when I go into that sweep. And it's worked really, really well, actually. I was playing with it yesterday and with a light Spey rod, and it was really interesting to see the results from that. And that was putting less onto my shoulder as well. So when I was making the sweep, just flat, softening that grip really made a difference. I don't know if you notice silly little things like that as well.
I do, and also that the modern rods, I've noticed, the cork handle has shortened as well slightly. It's not such a, for me, because I'm only 5'2" in my waders, so I've only got little arms, and the old-fashioned rods you used to be leaning right round trying to get to the end to get the grip, because that's what I saw all the men doing. But actually with the modern rods it's a lot easier to shorten it slightly. But when I'm teaching, I sometimes show people that I will hold the butt end of the rod with one hand, but for the initial lift coming up, you can do it just literally with your index finger. Balance the rod on your index finger, thumb very gently on top, and lift, 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 lift. And as you go round, just push the bottom hand out and turn your body. And a lot of people think it's purely arm work. It's not. You Spey cast with your entire body. So it's a full body workout as well. It's very good for the core, very good for strengthening. And I use the analogy of driving again. When you're driving, you look ahead at the road, you look where you want to go. It's exactly the same with Spey casting. You want to look to the end point, turn your body to look towards where you want the fly to land, because the rod is an extension of your body. And hopefully it won't hurt your shoulders quite so much. If you get the rod doing the work, as you know, you can just adapt it slightly, make it a little bit easier for you. But it's also important, I think, to remember that one size doesn't fit all. Everybody will have a slightly different casting technique. Everybody has different strengths in their body. As I'm sure you're the same, with the work that we do, very strong in the upper body. And somebody who's sitting in an office all day and just goes fishing for a few days a year isn't going to have that same muscle memory, that same strength as we would have. So I always sort of pare back a bit and say, particularly when I'm teaching ladies, if it's hurting, stop, take a break, because we're doing it wrong. You're using muscles that you don't normally use, so they're going to ache a bit. But if it's really sore, you're doing it wrong, take a break, relax, and come back fresh into it, and you'll enjoy it far more.
There's some interesting points there, actually, because I was thinking about sport generally. And I think I've mentioned it on one of these podcasts before, so apologies if I have already. But it seems to me that other sport has moved on a little bit more, in the sense of there is a little bit more flexibility. And I often use the cricketer, the Australian guy, Steve Smith, who technically is all over the place, but you can't get the guy out. And so they've not tried to coach that out of him, that they have let him play the way that he wants to play, and it has worked. And I think there are things we have to get right in casting. But I was talking to a fellow guide, Andy, yesterday about it, and there's a friend of mine, well, he was a client of mine, and I got to know really well that technically the book would say he was wrong. But I don't know many other people who couldn't land a fly exactly where I wanted it to go. And he said to me one time, "Can you help me sort my casting?" And I said, "Look, it was very risky." And I said, "Look, the problem you'll have is, are you ever going to fish a pond or a lake?" He said, "No, it's just streams. It will always be streams for me." I said, "Well, you're going to be absolutely fine then, because what I would do is take that cast apart, get you casting technically correct, but you might lose something within that and you get a little bit confused." And so what I've tried to do when I was teaching, instructing, was not make it, this is how I think you should cast, work with what I had, and then try and bring those principles in, but not take somebody right back to the beginning, because I don't think that helps their confidence, does it?
No, it doesn't at all. And I think it's learning somebody's limits as well. As a guide, you very quickly, a lot of it is actually about being a people person and learning to read people, trying to calculate how confident they are and how confident they're feeling, and not wanting to criticize people and put them down, but play on their strengths. And as we've said, adapt to them. Definitely, there are cases when people come along, as I've seen it the same as you've just said, where they're casting perfectly proficiently. It might not be the most beautiful, perfect Spey cast, but they're catching fish. they're enjoying themselves. Do I want to undo it and undermine their confidence? No. A problem that I have seen in the past is when people are trying to show other people how to cast, and they'll rip off loads of line and they'll put the whole body behind it, and they're overcasting beyond the ability of the person they're teaching. And that totally undermines the guest's confidence. And I think that's a no-no for me, is that I will always try to find humour in a situation for them, try and encourage them. And I always say to people, never ever cast beyond your capabilities, because you'll get frustrated, you'll get upset. And when you're upset and when you're stressed about things, you go tense. And for casting, you need to be relaxed. As soon as you tense up, you go rigid, the rod goes rigid, and you need that rod to be flexing and bending as much as possible. And it's the same for the fisherman or woman. You need that flexible mental attitude, but also you need to just flex your body, relax into the casting and enjoy it.
That's a really good point. And where you started the reply there as well, saying about you're actually in the hospitality or looking after people and service industry, I always described it. And, we had guides that worked with us, and the first thing I would look for was their ability to get on with people. And that was really important to me, because I could teach them the rest. But if they can't get on with people, or they're sitting there wanting to hold the rod the whole time, and I've mentioned before, I think on podcasts, that, I'd get people phone me up saying, I'm really good at catching fish. I think I should be a guide. What do I do next? And my first point to them was say, right, okay, well, imagine you've got a client next to you and there's a big trout rising under a tree and they're continually getting caught in the tree. Are you sitting there thinking, I could be catching that fish? Because I said, if you are, you're in the wrong job, and just enjoy your fishing. And coming back to what you said about the casting as well, is really interesting, because they're not taking an exam. It's about enjoying yourself. And so as long as people can get their fly from A to B as efficiently as possible, they're not trying to get a score. They're not trying to, as long as they can get it there and cover the fish and they're having a good time, well, that's all cool with me, really.
Exactly. I mean, I get quite a lot of people who are just coming for maybe 1, 2, 3 days. And really what they're looking for is to be able to say, to tick off the Spey from the bucket list and say, I've cast a fly on the Spey, I've done the Spey casting. And I think a lot of guiding work is actually managing people's expectations now. Unfortunately, the Atlantic salmon aren't there in the numbers that we will remember them have been in. So it's managing expectations. It's saying to people, you're coming here for a fishing experience. You're not necessarily here to catch a fish. If we do, it's fantastic and it's a great bonus. But there is no pressure to have to catch a fish. And I'm sure you've had times as well when the client hands you the rod and says, well, I can't catch a fish, you do it. And that pressure to try and hook a fish that they've seen, and damn well it's not going to take. But you have to keep going. You have to keep them happy. And I generally will do my best for them, but I will try not to. If I think that they've been casting a bit short, I will try to just say, let's nudge out a little bit further, or you have another go, just 5 more casts. And it's about encouraging people. It's not about, you forget your ego, that goes out the window. I've had one experience where fortunately not with me, it was with one of my friends who's a gilly, and he had clients there and asked me to go down and give him a hand. And the chap he was with had had enough and was reeling in, so my friend walked down the bank towards him, and this man came out of the river, dropped his rod down on the grass and walked straight past the gilly without even making eye contact. And I suppose really I should have just let it go, but being me, I couldn't have this. I think everybody should be treated equally on the river. It's a great leveler for people. So I just went over and I very quietly pointed out that that's not how we behave here on the Spey, and could they please go back and pick up the rod. And actually they did, because I was polite, but I was very firm. And as I say, fishing's a leveler. It doesn't matter to me. Fishing is for everybody. I have sat in a fishing hut with people with titles, people who are in very, very low paid jobs, but they've had this fantastic opportunity to come and fish one of the best rivers in the world. And when you sit in that fishing hut, whatever you have in the bank, whatever academic achievements you have, anything else goes out the window. We're all equal. We're all there with the same purpose because we're passionate fishermen, fisherwomen. It's a way of life for us, and it's something we all want to enjoy.
And the salmon don't care what you have or don't have, I don't think, do they?
No, not at all. The salmon don't know that. That's what another thing I always say is, the salmon can't read the label on your rod or the label on your waders. It's a great leveler. I keep saying that, but it really is. And another thing on that basis as well, that the salmon don't know. It always makes me laugh when people are choosing a fly out of the box and they look at it, and we all make the same mistake. We all look down on this fly. And the majority of the time when it's in the water, the fish is actually looking up at the fly. So somebody once said that the fly hooks the fisherman before it hooks the fish. And I think that's very true. I think perhaps when we're choosing flies, we should twirl them around a bit, look at them from all angles, and then decide. But at the end of the day, you choose your fly, you take your chances, and you go out there and cast and hope to hook a fish.
And I think the fly thing's a lot to do with confidence as well, isn't it? And,
Absolutely.
if you feel you've got that right fly on, you probably do fish better anyway, don't you?
You do, totally. And I often I'll work down through a pool, and if I don't have any takes at all, then we'll change over and we'll go on to something completely different. Or I'll say to the client, right, you choose. And it might be the most ludicrous fly possible that they pull out, but you never know. You're always in with a chance. If your fly's in the water, you're in with a chance. But I remember going back
Absolutely.
25 years ago, I remember seeing a salmon take a cigarette butt. So it just goes to show they're not fussy. We pay too much attention to these beautiful flies, and they are a work of art. They are stunning things. And to see them in motion in the water is incredible. But I do think that sometimes if a fish is going to take, it's going to take.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, I must admit. Tell me, how much do you do guide? Do your days would you get an experienced angler who wants to be guided, or do you get a angler who says, okay, well, I've done a little bit, can you point out some things? Or do you get people who've never done it before? How does that what's a typical sort of guest that you tend to have?
It's a real mix, actually, which is great. It's always good to have a diverse group of people in your working life. Absolute beginners. I get people who've been fishing for years and years and have picked up bad habits and want them ironed out. But as we discussed earlier, I think if they're still hooking fish, you can give them a few pointers if they're still enjoying what they're doing. But to try and take them back, to strip it right back down and start again is going to be too much, really, and will undermine confidence. I do quite a few ladies' days and charity ladies' days, and those tend to be total beginners. But we get a mix of abilities as well. There are a lot of women out there who want to come and learn to fly fish and haven't a clue how to start. And I think a great way is to come along with a group of girls and have a go together and then encourage each other and just enjoy the day.
And have you seen in recent times, I know we've had some great campaigns to encourage ladies into angling as well. Have you seen an uptick, or has it always sort of kind of been there quietly in the background, or are you seeing more ladies wanting to go out and try fly fishing?
I think there are more wanting to try it. I think it's becoming more accessible to ladies to do it. I think social media helps a lot. It makes it more normal to people. That girls who've never fished before are suddenly seeing other girls out there fishing, enjoying it, catching fish, having fun. So they feel that it's somewhere that they can go along and be confident and have a go at. I think women have always fished with great success. We all know about Georgina Ballantyne, Jean Wolfe, people like that who, for me, have been real trailblazers. But I think that women now are looking for things to do that are away from technology, that are away from the children. Or sometimes actually it's nice to have had family groups come along, and you get the children fishing with you. But the ladies' days that I do, everybody just loves the chance to switch off, to have great fun doing something that they've never tried before or known how to do. And it is very overwhelming. I've fished all my life and I still find it quite intimidating sometimes going into a tackle shop or going around some of the fairs and going onto the stands, the fishing stands. It's very much perceived as a man's sport, but I think that is starting to change now. We've got a lot of high profile girls on Instagram, on Facebook, who are doing really great things for raising awareness of women in fishing. And that can only be a good thing. Sorry, chaps.
Coming back to tackle shops and stuff like that, was it intimidating in the sense that, people would give you the time of day or they assumed you were buying stuff for someone else? How was that was it intimidating from that point of view as well? Were you taken seriously as an angler?
No. And in fact, even this year, and I was heading down to opening day on the Tay, and I needed some more hooks and I had to pop into a shop. And I just got totally ignored and blanked. And I went over and I said what I was looking for, and just this sort of gruff nature. And then I'm somebody who, when they see a challenge, likes to rise to it. And so I just started chatting and I said what I did, and then the ears sort of pricked up a bit and they fired off a few questions at me and I answered, and they named a few names and I replied that I knew them very well. And so then I slotted into place and they were much more open. But it is very, it's, how can I explain it? Yeah, it's always been a man's world for a lot of people. It hasn't for me, but it's still awkward. It is that perception that I'm buying things for my husband, my boyfriend, whoever. A few years ago, I was contacted by a rod manufacturer who was asking me to try out some prototypes for them. And they said they were thinking of doing a range for women. And this was when I suggested the idea of shortening the cork handle slightly. And they turned around to me and they said, "And shall we make it pink?" And I laughed and I said, "Why don't you go the whole hog and just call it a cute stick?" It's just, you're not going to get women fishing just because something's pink. Sorry, guys, it doesn't work that way. But it was a nice idea that they were trying to do something to bring more women in. Actually, another little tale of buying things for husbands, etc., was that, and this is a role reversal for you. When I got married, I had to arrange my wedding around various weeks of fishing, and there was only one weekend in May that was free. So we got married on the Saturday afternoon, and the Saturday night I left him at home to go off fishing for a week and came back and delayed the honeymoon. And I thought, somebody said to me, "Fight your battles early." And it was very true. I did that. It's no wonder that the marriage failed, but fishing took over and I'm still happy. So it was a win-win. I got my week's fishing instead of a honeymoon, and I still get to go fishing for a living.
That's pretty hardcore. That's really impressive. Nice one. That's what the effect it has on us, isn't it? It is,
It is.
some of us, and I'm sure many of the people listening, but some of us, our whole life revolves around it, doesn't it? Be it the hatches, be it the water heights, be it whatever that we do. It means it's so deeply ingrained in us that that's how our life is, isn't it? That fishing does mean so much to us.
It really does. And we can't, I don't know about you, but I mean, if I'm driving up and down the A9 or somewhere and I'm crossing the river, I always have to slow down and look across and see what the conditions are. And then I start daydreaming on the rest of the journey as to which fly I'd be using and which rod I'd get out and where I'd position myself and where would be the likely taking place. And you always read a river, don't you? You can't just walk the dog beside a river and ignore the fact that there is this potential fish pool right next to you. You're constantly reading and assessing. And as you say, yeah, we're a strange breed, us fishers, but I don't think we're the worst of them by a long stretch of the imagination. There's far worse things we could be doing in life.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm lucky, and having had this enforced layoff, it made me realise what it did mean to us, and the introduction of this fly culture. I just said it's only when you have something taken away you truly understand what it means to you, and it's been really fantastic to come back to it. And stopping guiding for me as well has made me love fishing even more, actually. And, I went out yesterday morning and fished. I just had the dog in the car and we went down and fished. And it just wasn't about, as you said earlier, it wasn't about catching a fish. It was just going down, playing around a little bit, doing some spey casting, seeing how my shoulder was. And that was part of it. And I wasn't really actively after fish, but it was still equally as enjoyable. Seeing a fish move was pretty cool, I have to say. But it wasn't about that. It was about more than that. And that was why it means so much. I think there's so many facets of it that I love that make me keep coming back for it time and time again, I think.
I think that's right. I think a lot of it is you meet some amazing people. And you make memories that last a lifetime, not just for you, but for them as well. And one of the really special things about the job that I do is the places it takes me to. You get to see places that you'd never know existed otherwise. You get access to places that nobody else knows about. And also, it's the places it not only takes you geographically, but also in your head. The time it gives you to think. And for me, what I love is its family memories. My paternal grandfather died before I was born, but I still use some of his old kit occasionally. And it brings him back in a way. It's carrying on a family tradition. I feel that he's there with me, and if my son's using the kit as well, it's really special that it's carrying on. It's something it's a life skill and something that we all enjoy that will never be forgotten. And multi-generational. I love that about it.
It was really interesting. I assume this ties quite nicely actually, because when I was going back to the river to be able to fish for the first time after lockdown, I wanted to fish a bamboo rod with a dry fly cast to a rising fish, and which I managed to do, and I managed to catch a nice fish and everything else. And I saw on your Instagram the other day that you had a bamboo rod out. Was that your grandfather's, and do you like fishing bamboo?
I do. It was one of several that I've been really lucky to inherit. I think I've confessed to you before we were recording that I'm a bit of a tackle tart at heart. I love the old stuff. It's great to go out and get new kit, but there's something so special about handling the old kit, handling something that that your ancestors have used before as well. And bamboo rods for me, totally different style. I love it. Yes, I think it's great. I think everybody should have a go. Having handled the modern rods, go and switch off, pick up a bamboo rod and just adapt, because that's the great thing as well. You have to learn to adapt not only to conditions and the places and the people that you're with, but also to the kit that you're using. I remember when I was much younger thinking, I want to reach a point where rather than sticking with just one rod, I can get to the point where I can pick up any rod and cast proficiently with it. And the bamboo, yes, there's something so special. I think you'll agree, won't you? It's magical using those older rods.
It's feel, I think, more than anything else as well. And, I think John Girac described it perfectly when he said casting graphite's like writing with a word processor or a computer. Casting bamboo is like using a fountain pen. And they both have their place. And I mix between the two. I enjoy fishing both of them equally. But there is something, it has a real soul, bamboo, and a real feel that's hard to express, I think.
Absolutely, yes. So when we do go, we get out the old kit, we get the bamboo out. My son has a modern rod as well, which he likes to use, but it's great to see them casting with great grandfather's kit. But the trout fishing has come about because of lockdown, and obviously I've got no childcare at the moment, so I've been at home with the children, and there's a limit to my homeschooling abilities. And so I thought, right, I'm going to have to teach them something that I do know about, and something else that they enjoy, and something that's healthy for them and gets them outside and stops them worrying about what's going on in the world. And we've had great fun. We haven't had a great degree of success, but we've achieved a lot of fun, a lot of laughter, and the memory making, as I said before, the guddling about for trout, jumping in and out of little burns and little streams, and having a whale of a time. So they're actually saying next week, can we go to the river? Please, can we go to the river? And I'm trying to think of an excuse and somewhere that I can put them safely so that actually mummy can go to the river and mummy can have some mummy time. It'll come. We'll get there.
And have you got them tying flies? Would that be cool to do?
It would be very cool to do. My son's had a go, actually. It's something that I hope he will be very keen on, because I'm afraid it's not something that's for me. I get so frustrated because I used to work in publishing, funnily enough, and I was on the editorial side because I always got frustrated that on the art side of things, I could never make things look on the page how I wanted them to, as they did in my head. Whereas with words, I was much better. So I stuck to editorial. So yes, it would be great if my son could tie the flies. That would be fantastic. And I have a very, very hairy Cocker Spaniel at the moment who desperately needs a haircut. She's never been groomed before, but I think that actually one of the jobs we might do in the next few days is give her a little clip, because she's got the perfect coat for tying flies. So we'll have a lot of fun with those. Somebody actually created a Lady Fisher fly for me a couple of years ago, which has been great fun to use. And they also tied one called a Copper Dog, which was using some of my Spaniel's coat. And it works very well. It looks superb in the water. Always good to have some fun with it rather than taking it too seriously.
Yeah, I do the same. I've not, and I said elsewhere, during the lockdown, I didn't fall into, I say the trap's not the right word, but I didn't sit and tie thousands of flies waiting for a lockdown to be lifted. And I've tied a few recently since we're fishing again, purely because I had a pattern that was working really well on the trout and I wanted to use. But I've always with dogs, we had a golden retriever, and that was almost a good hare's ear dubbing that I'd use on a nymph pattern. And the black lab we've got now, there's probably applications for that. I think I've tied some cascades using some of his fur in there somewhere as well, and I think there's applications there for stoats tails and bits and pieces like that, so I might think about that before too long as well. So yeah, the dogs are really useful fly tying material.
They are, and in fact, when my children had their first haircuts, I kept a lock of their hair, and I've had those tied into flies as well. I don't use them in case I lose them, but it's great to have them there for posterity.
While we're talking about confessions, I was always rebellious when I was in my 30s as well, and I used to bleach my hair and cut some of that, and I've got some of that as dubbing somewhere or other. I think I could probably do with sticking it back on now, but I probably will use that in some flies somewhere along the way as well. But we'll see what happens. But you said you travelled a fair bit. Where has fishing taken you to?
Not everywhere I'd like to go yet. Unfortunately, I had plans for this year, and they've gone by the wayside, unfortunately, or they'll be knocked into next year, hopefully. I've been out to Cuba. I've done some saltwater fishing, some deep sea fishing there, marlin and barracuda, which was a great experience, and I can tick the box and say I've done it. But that style of fishing, sitting on a boat all day, it was great in the sunshine and some nice cold beers, but it's not the same as actually casting and that sense of anticipation all the time that you get with fly fishing. Montenegro is absolutely stunning. I'd recommend that to people. Some amazing trout there. New Zealand as well. That's a phenomenal place to go. But wherever I go in the world, it's the Spey that's always home for me. It just calls me back, and I couldn't pin it down to one thing about the Spey that pulls me back. It's just the whole experience of the place.
There is something about your home water that is always, it's the same with my home water, the Tour, that it will always be my first love and will continue to be no matter what. And you compare everything else. I think, again, coming back to John Girac, I think he said something along those sorts of lines, that when you go somewhere else, you say, oh, this is a bit wider than the Tour, or it's a bit narrower than the Tour. Oh, this section's like the Tour, and everything, your home water is always in your mind, I think, isn't it?
It is. It's the baseline, I think, by which you measure all other fishing trips that you have. And it's the place that holds the most memories, I think, and the place that makes you happy. It's whenever anything bad has happened in my life or anything sad has happened, it's always been the first thought is, I need to get back to the river. I just need that sense of healing, of being by the river, that switching off and forgetting everything. As we've said before, it's the river is home. Home isn't on the river. The river is actually my home. It's where I'm happiest. It's the only place I really want to be.
Well put. You said you lost the trip already this year. What are your plans for 2020?
I think, like a lot of people, everything's on hold and just having to see how we go. We're several weeks behind England here in Scotland with regards to coming out of lockdown. So we're slightly more restricted at the moment. I was meant to be going to Iceland in a week or so, and that's obviously out the window. So I think it will be a case of staying local. Hopefully, I hope to do another Ladies' Day in September if I can, or a couple that we've had to lose from earlier on this season, bump those back towards the end of the season. And I'd really like, on a selfish level, just to go fishing myself for a few days and just relax and enjoy it. I think the business will be on hold until next year, unfortunately. Realistically, it's very difficult to provide the level of service that I'd like to if I can't stand too close to somebody. You do have to, it's a very tactile thing, learning to fish, and I think it helps if you have a guide actually holding your hand so that you can feel the motion, feel the direction that your hand should be going in. And yes, you can teach to a certain extent from the bank or from a distance, but personally I would feel I was shortchanging people. So if somebody's fished before, it's okay, we'll be able to work around it. But the complete novice, I think, really, unfortunately, it's going to be virtually impossible unless things really lift. We'll just have to see.
Just going off in another direction, something I wanted to ask you and thought I would bring up is, how do you see the difference between a guide and a gillie?
Two people doing a very similar job. My breakdown of it is that a gillie is employed full-time by an estate, and a guide is somebody who's freelance, who might work with other guides, but who isn't tied to one piece of water. I know you get the relief gillies as well, who can float between, but to me, really, that's the basic breakdown. We're all doing pretty much the same job, but a guide also will be, we're talking about Speyside as a whole. We're not just talking about the Spey. I'm somebody who's passionate about the whole of Speyside. It's an area that I love. It's a beautiful part of the world. It has a very different pace of life to a lot of other places. The gillies, they've lived here. Most of them have lived here all their life as well, and they're passionate about it. But the guides might possibly be more willing to say, "We'll try another river in future if you've had enough of the Spey." Or I think we're slightly freer agents, but I think in terms of what we do 9 to 5, although the hours aren't 9 to 5, but through the working day, it's pretty much the same job. The only confession I would make as being a female guide is that I would have loved to have become a ghillie. It was a dream to do so, but, and the feminists of the world will hate me for saying this, you have to be realistic. I'm 5'2". I'm not hugely heavy. There are physical limitations to what I could do. I can row a boat. I was a cox at uni, actually, so I'm pretty good in a rowing boat. But could I work one of the big old wooden boats across the Spey in a spate? No. In a rising river? No. I could probably get myself across. Would I feel safe taking clients out in those conditions? Absolutely not. So that kind of burst that balloon for me. I had to be realistic. And the closest that I could get to doing it full time was to become a guide, to work for myself or work with other guides and do the job the best that I possibly could. How do you see the difference? Does that sort of tie in with your view of it, or?
Do you know, that's a really interesting question, because we don't obviously here have ghillies in that sense. And I didn't know. And I think you've actually answered that for me. And I think saying being attached to one piece of water versus a free agent, I think has summed it up perfectly. Actually, I couldn't have answered that better. So I was interested to know and learn myself. So I think
Oh,
that's absolutely, 100% really. You also mentioned that about the free agent thing, and it seems to me that you do have access to a lot of water as well, which is pretty useful and gives you a little bit of an advantage. And also from a guiding point of view, it's kind of nice to go to different places as well, isn't it? Rather than just fishing one beat the whole time, I guess.
it is, yeah. And I'm not just tied to the Spey. I can go to other rivers up here in Scotland, which is wonderful. And I love, we discussed earlier, the Devon, which I love because it reminds me of the size of the rivers that I grew up with as a young child. But I'm in the very fortunate position that I know a lot of the ghillies professionally, and equally, I know quite a few of the proprietors up here socially as friends. So I fall in that middle ground. So if I'm looking for fishing, I can have a word with the ghillies and see if anybody's dropped out, if I think that their beat might have been fully booked, or I can go to the landowner, the proprietor, and say, have you got anything, or can I fish the home rod? Have you got it available? I've got a client coming. And it's that advantage of having been here for so long, the advantage of experience, of knowing the right people, having been in the right place at the right time for a long time. You never get bored fishing the same pool, but it's wonderful to go to a new piece of water. I predominantly stick to the middle and lower stretches of the Spey. I don't know the upper reaches quite so well. I fished a few of them, but again, it's amazing how much the river changes between the big wide stretches at the bottom and then the faster flowing, slightly narrower ones of the middle. You never ever get bored of being on the river. No 2 days are ever the same, and in fact, no morning and no afternoon are ever the same either. It changes. The fishing in Scotland changes with the weather. I think it was Billy Connolly said, if you don't like the weather in Scotland, hang around for an hour because you'll get all 4 seasons in 1 hour. And that causes the river to change, the pool you're fishing to change. It's wonderful. You never get bored.
How does, I think we ought to just touch on this as well. How does fishing as a whole feel to you? And what about from the fish's point of view? How are you concerned with things? How does that feel to you, and conservation, and how are you feeling about that right now?
I think that's a really important question. Wild Atlantic salmon are under threat from so many different areas, and we've had the great work done by various companies looking into the reasons why. I think as fishermen, we know the reasons why, but we need the actual scientific proof. So things like the Missing Salmon Project have been great for raising awareness for people beyond the bubble of fishermen and women. when I do ladies' days, I find it very important to educate people on the conservation side, explain to them how important it is about catch and release. I personally haven't kept a fish that I've caught for, it would be over 15 years now since I last kept a fish for myself. I think there's a very important message, actually, that one of the biggest threats for salmon, we've got problems from sawbills, we've got problems from seals, we've got the predation side of things, we've got the Animal and Wildlife Bill, which I think will take effect from March 2021, which is threatening to amend or revoke the seal licenses that we have. It's that awful balance of nature of seals are wonderful creatures, but there's a huge number of them. I heard rumours that some of them a year or so ago were being vaccinated against distemper. In my mind, that's nature trying to balance things out by lowering the number of seals, so hopefully more salmon can get into the river. And it was a year when the water was incredibly low and incredibly warm, so the fish were under huge pressure trying to get into the river. We've got the problem with trawlers, we've got the problems with the invasion of Pacific salmon coming in. Are they filling a gap? Are we going to get these hybrids between the Pacific and the Atlantics? They're beautiful creatures, wild Atlantic salmon, but they live below the waterline. They're not fluffy bunnies, so they don't appeal to the general public. And with salmon farming in particular, people want cheap food. We'll never get rid of salmon farms, but we all know that they are causing problems for our wild fish, particularly on migratory routes. And I think that from a PR point of view for saving the salmon, we need to get to the consumer. And if they're not going to buy into the fluffy bunny, that, you know, they're not pretty animals. If we educate them as to how toxic this industry is, how it's not sustainable, it's not ethical, how even if they're using wrasse or these feeder fish to try to negate the problem with lice, that actually they're then intensively farming these fish, or they're removing too many of the wrasse, so it has a knock-on effect. The amount of excrement going onto the seabed and the pollution levels is horrific. But for me as a mother, particularly at Christmas time, you see people going around offering smoked salmon canapes. It's one of the most toxic foods that you could possibly eat. I will not let my children eat that. And I think if we can get to the Yummy Mummy Brigade and point out to them that this is a toxic food, it's sold to you when you're pregnant as eat this, it's full of omega-3. It's not a healthy option. Don't touch it. There are ethical and sustainable alternatives out there. Go for those. And I think with the ladies' days in particular, it's just a tiny, tiny drop in a very huge ocean. But trying to explain to them that this luxury food is not a luxury. It's toxic to us, it's toxic to the environment, it's toxic to our native salmon, and we really need to do something about it. So yes, you can hear I'm on my high horse here. It's something that I really, really feel very strongly about.
Yeah.
We can't blame people because they're ignorant of it, but we need a really big push out there with PR to educate people so that they're no longer ignorant of the effects of this supposedly healthy food that they're eating, that's being pushed to them, is having on the environment and on our health as well. I'll try and stop ranting now.
That was a very well thought out rant, though. So, and I think that was very fair. So, yeah, we like yourself, we won't eat it. We try and tell people not to eat it when they listen. I think one of the facts we always have at the beginning of fly culture is still not eating farm salmon and trying to, in our own little way. I think the Patagonia film did a lot of good, but of course you've got to keep those momentums with people. And once it's in the forefront or in front of them, then it disappears again because something else comes in. It almost feels as though we're probably ripe for another push again, just to keep letting people know these things, and in any way that we possibly can to make people aware in the wider public about what's happening and letting them know that this stuff isn't good for you. So yeah, I'm with you on that. we've talked for well over an hour now. It's been fantastic chatting to you, Dani. If people want to book a guided day with you, where can they find you?
Probably the best way is through my website, which is www.ladyfisher.co.uk. You'll find me on Instagram under Dani Morey _Lady Fisher. I have a Facebook page as well for Lady Fisher, but all the details are on the website or on Instagram. So you'll find me there, and by all means, chuck me a line and we'll get you out on the river. And Pete, I think we need to get you on the Spey.
I'm up for that. Don't you worry about that. That would be a dream come true. I've never fished there. We've got a lovely piece, actually. And I know, thank you for supporting fly culture. And I know you've bought the last couple of issues. This one has got a beautiful piece from Alan Gregg about the Spey and what it means to him in there. And it's a beautifully written piece about growing up and first fishing the Spey and going back to it as well. So hopefully you'll enjoy reading that.
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah, and thank you so much for being a guest on here. It's been great to chat to you about fishing and learn a little bit about the Spey. I love your ethos about fishing as well, and how you think about it, and how you want to teach people and bring people into it. The other thing I wanted to ask as well about the Ladies' Days, if somebody wants to sign up for that, how do they go about doing that?
Again, all the details will be on the website. It does need updating now because of lockdown. I'm unfortunate. A lot of people in lockdown have learnt lots of new skills and had loads of time on their hands. I've had my children suddenly needing me 24/7 and no let up. And so I haven't managed to update things. It's a task for this weekend, hopefully, to get that updated. But just send me an email or give me a phone call. All the details are on the Lady Fisher website and we can sort something out there.
Fantastic. Dani, it's been great to have you along. Thank you so much for being a guest and listening to the questions.
Thanks, Pete. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to the Fly Culture podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this one as much as me. There are lots more planned. Again, if you think of somebody I should be speaking to, drop me a line. If you have any questions, we may plan to do some more answering listener questions as well. So drop me a line. The usual place, peter@flyculturemag.com. But thanks for listening. There'll be plenty more of these real soon.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter.